Hello, welcome, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. This is the Study Success Blueprint. My name is Matthew Mace and I am your guide throughout this podcast. Every month we'll be in your ears talking about ways and strategies that we can improve how we conduct clinical studies, sharing knowledge, and focusing to make sure we remain vigilant and successful in all of our endeavors. I will come on to myself later, but I've worked in clinical trials and clinical cardiology for a number of years across industry as well as in the public sector. So why are we in your ears today and what are we really going to be talking about? Monthly, I will be sitting down and speaking with those who've performed successful trials across industry as well as physicians, as well as researchers, and just diving in about what they've learned, what they've discovered of how they have been successful and what their keys have been for their positive outcomes in their trials. So why are we really talking about this? Surely we've cracked the code. Clinical studies are not a new phenomenon, but every year it feels like Groundhog Day when we sit there and we look at our diary and we look at what we need to achieve and accomplish throughout the year. And there's always going to be pitfalls and changes, and the whole industry is very, very dynamic. So there's not a single answer to any of the problems and solutions that we're going to be facing in our day-to-day work as we try to get human subjects into trials and further advance our understanding of medical technology. So I thought I'd kick off this first podcast just by sharing about who I am and why I'm here and what I do and my experiences in clinical trials. And now I'll be peppering the conversations I have with world-leading experts over the coming months and years. But here is just to give you a flavor and some of the learnings and takeaways that I've had. For those who know me, welcome back. For those who don't, I studied in clinical cardiology in 2009 in the United Kingdom. I was a clinical physiologist, which means I focused on heart failure and devices as well as routine diagnostics for cardiovascular disease. In my final year thesis, I got a very big bug for clinical trials and understanding large data in a really different way. So in that time, I conducted a retrospective analysis on all of our patients who had gone through our hospital who received CRT, so cardiac resynchronization therapy, which is a treatment for heart failure, and trying to understand whether the optimization techniques used by one cohort of physicians was inferior, superior, or equal to a method used by another cohort. Specifically, I was talking about echocardiographic, ultrasound, guided optimization of the therapy. Now, what's very important is as we go through these podcasts, the actual result of the trials are not overly important, but what's important is that as we talk about them and socialize what went on and what we faced and what our challenges were, that we are able to move forward with each trial with slightly more levels of conviction and energy and success. And we know we are confident that we can face whatever challenges are put against us. Anyway, the long and short of it is the trial that I conducted is a retrospective analysis of 1,000 patients who'd gone through our center over the course of 7 years. And my suggested outcome was that there was a neutral benefit to echo optimization. Therefore, there was an increased cost with no additional patient benefit. I'll come back later and touch on why that trial gave me a big bug for clinical studies. But just wrapping out my journey, I then progressed on from the NHS. I worked for St. Jude, who was then later acquired by Abbott Labs, before moving into more startup and scale up technologies, which has brought me to where I am today. Having just left Acorai, as I speak to you in January 2025, we were able to complete one of the largest ever studies performed in cardiac hemodynamics in a heart failure population in an absolute record time of 14 months. I'm going to share today some of the key learnings from that study and what I had pushing me forward every day. Before I dive into all of that, and we talk about my learnings from the recent study, I thought I'd just round off my history in the middle period of time where I was working at St. Jude and Abbott. I got involved in a number of electrophysiology-based studies as well as defibrillator and device-based studies. And it's very interesting when you're a commercial sponsor of the studies, you have a very different motivation behind making sure patients are in your trial and wanting to do the best and knowing that you can't actually get involved. So you're watching on the sidelines, but really want to be on playing in the field. Again, what's really important in clinical trials is that we have true, unbiased scientific discovery where we understand the benefits and risks of any associated technology. So, as much as clinical and commercial partnerships are important for the success of clinical trials, we have to always be cautious about how close those partnerships are and any lines that might get blurred along the process. I was very, very fortunate in my clinical journey to be at St. Jude at a really exciting time just after the acquisition of CardioMEMS. And I was even more fortunate to be able to work under the wings of Dr. Emma Braithwaite, who is a formidable researcher and a truly wonderful and lovely human being. Now, we approached a study across Europe of a technology that was very successful in a large randomized clinical trial and now had to translate that into a European population. And that gives me one of the main learnings and the bugs along the way, which is when you're designing a trial, you're not designing a trial for now, you're designing something that will provide evidence for many, many years to come. The time horizon of evidence through to clinical guidelines is a very long and arduous journey. And at my time at Abbott and with Emma, it made me really appreciate that patience is a key characteristic that we must have as we approach a commercial and clinical partnership. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast. After I left Abbott, I then progressed on to working for a number of startups, and I had the great opportunity to be asked to join as a co-founder and eventually chief scientific officer of Acorai. Now that sounds very grandiose. Ultimately, what we're looking at is a technology which has been studied in a very, very small, homogeneous population in Sweden, and we now need to figure out if that technology will work when applied across a larger geographic area. And this brings me on to my first point, which I understood back when I did my first clinical research project for my thesis in CRT, which is firstly knowing the limits that you have, knowing the limits of the data as it was when I did my CRT trial, but knowing the limits of the organization. Now, when you're a sponsor of a clinical trial and you're also a startup, you're at the whims of the capital markets and the venture market. Additionally to that, when you're a startup venture or even a industry player, you launch a new technology, you invent something, you're sold, it's your baby, you're very happy with it, and you bring it forward and you think it's going to change the world, and you want to go ahead straight away and do that large randomized clinical trial with thousands of patients to prove that this technology is absolutely hands down better than the standard of care or any nearest competitor. But what I'd learned from my time with Dr. Braithwaite was that we have to understand where we are today with our level of evidence and where we want to be in the future. And for right or wrong, the scientific community has a long-standing history of a progressive improvement in clinical treatment for patients where all steps to a new future are rigorously tested and explored to make sure there's no undue risk exposed to the patients. So at Acorai, we have a technology which looks like it could be promising. We have a capital constraint, we have a time constraint, we have a people constraint, and additionally, we need to first understand if the technology is applicable across a broader population before we push and soldier into the things that really get us excited as trialists and as sponsors and startups, that we might make an impact on patients' lives. So I'm not going to labor this point any further, but really we have to first of all know our limitations. Know that clinical knowledge works in a stepwise process that gets us towards our eventual goal. Every one of those steps must be rigorously tested to show the risk and benefit ratio of any technology or any intervention. And we then also have to know the limitations of not just us as a sponsor, but also the clinical collaborators we're working with. I'll just change the message just a little bit slightly for those clinical researchers, MDs, research nurses, technicians who are listening. When we execute a study, when we think of a trial design, when we put our hands up and agree to be part of a study, we must be rigorously focused on what we can do. That means knowing our limit. Have we got enough time? Have we got enough patience? Do we have the right expertise? Can we turn it around in the time frame that is going to be asked of us? Really, really focus on what the limitations are and what the limitations you have and what the limitations are of your partners. That brings me really nicely onto the next learning that I've accumulated over a number of years, and it keeps coming up and up and again, and you can't ever avoid it, which is really investing your time in understanding. Now, what does that really mean? Well, when you're designing a trial, what you really want to do is move fast and break things. If you follow like the Facebook model that has been taught to us, and normally working fast and breaking things means that you speak to a few people, you like your idea, you already love your idea, and you go ahead and you execute and you write the protocol and you do the ethics and you say, look, we'll just get patients. That's not a problem. But when we approach the question at Acorai, having known the pitfalls, having known the limitations, it always stems from a lack of communication and a lack of understanding. So why was Akorai's trial able to be completed in 14 months? Why was we able to recruit 1,600 patients with only 3 individuals? And at this moment in time, I'll give a big shout out to Helmin Verhoeven and Rita Picciotto, who without them, our trial would have not been as successful as it was. But that really highlights a point. We have a Brit, we have a formidable lady from the Netherlands, and we have a fantastic CTA from Portugal living in Sweden. And we're able to conduct a trial in the United States and have a keen eye on what we need to do and focus on. So how did that happen? Well, we took our time, we spoke to almost 150 different physicians and researchers and other industry professionals to understand the hacks, the shortcuts, the ways that we could make sure that we were working as efficiently as possible without devoting enormous amount of times into things that would be a complete dead end. So only once we had a resounding survey and we kept a list of all those who dissented and all those who questioned and queried what we were doing and made sure that we kept revisiting those, ready to move forward with a full understanding of what we needed to do, what our limitations were, what the limitations of our partners were, and how we could build something that we knew would be successful. I say knew would be successful. There's a lot of fear when it comes into doing a clinical trial. And, I remember the 15th of August, 2023, the day before the first enrollment, feeling absolutely petrified, speaking with Rita, sitting in central London, waiting to go into the hairfield. And you question and doubt your limits. Have we pushed too much? Have we invested too far? Did we misunderstand something? That's natural. But as long as you did the right prep work, you did the first thing, knowing your limits, you did the second thing, invest in the time to really understand the partners that you're working with, you've set yourself up for success. The last major learning that we take away, and over the next coming episodes, we're going to talk about this a lot, and it's really being available for those you're working with. And actually, when I wrote this down in the briefing note, I wrote be insanely available. As I said before, we have 3 clinical operations people sitting in Europe running a study in the United States. How on earth are you going to be available 24/7 for those trialists? Well, it's very simple. If we did step 2 and we spoke to our clinical trialists and we spoke to our research nurses, we would have a really good understanding of when and where any patients were going to be recruited at any moment in time. And then linking it back, we knew our own limitations. We knew when we were going to be available, when we weren't going to be available, who had what skills. So when questions come up, without any deliberation. We knew exactly whether we could or could not deal with the query. And if we couldn't deal with the query, we knew exactly the time frame in which someone would be online to be able to address it. Being available isn't about fixing the problem, isn't about jumping in your car, driving to the site. Being available is about making sure that whoever you're working with, that's internal colleagues, external colleagues, that they know that you've got their back. They know that you're trying everything you can to help and encourage and guide and move them forward. So tying all of these three things together, first of all, knowing your limits, secondly, investing in understanding, thirdly, being insanely available. What am I really meaning? Why am I beating about the bush on this one? And what I'm talking about is building trust. Trust between our clinical partners and our commercial partners, or if we're a researcher, building trust between ourselves as a research department and the patients. Trust is everything in clinical trials. We're basically asking a patient to use a technology or a drug or an intervention that we believe, based upon all the available evidence, is going to be more beneficial to them, or it will be beneficial to others. They're willing to accept the risks of a technology that is not widely tested and trust us that we have their best interests at heart and the best interest of the community at heart. Again, we'll keep coming back to this point over the next coming weeks and months. I wanted this first session just to be a good overview, set the tone of what we're going to try to be talking about. So rounding that all off, every month we're going to be sitting in your ears. We're going to be talking about clinical trials. We're going to be talking about ways that we can be successful from a practical standpoint, whether you're a researcher, MD, clinical associate, part of industry, or none of the above, and you're just really interested and really engaged. I think these learnings will be applicable, usable, practical, and help us grow as a community together. So with that, I can leave you today. Speak to you very soon. I've been Matthew Mace, and this is the Study Success Blueprint.